The story began inside the castle, where the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the halls. Lyle Carmaine stepped into the room. Waiting there was the demon lord, Dean Nosferatu, who remarked that Lyle had done well to come. Lyle immediately drew his sword, searching for where Nosferatu stood. Quietly, Nosferatu observed him, thinking that Lyle looked rather shabby for an adventurer. Even so, he could not ignore the impressive holy blade Lyle was holding. He had known this moment would arrive, and he had prepared for it. Nosferatu let out a laugh and mocked Lyle, calling him an underling of the Elysium Temple. He told him to stop shaking and questioned whether someone like him could truly be called a hero. Lyle stood there, stunned. Nosferatu continued, pointing out that Lyle's grip on the sword was wrong and that his stance was terrible. He questioned how someone standing like that could believe he could defeat the superior demon lord, Dean Nosferatu. Dean then told Lyle to step forward. He declared that he would face him with all his strength and act as his opponent. Lyle's hands trembled as he held the sword. Dean asked what was wrong and whether fear had taken hold of him. Lyle muttered under his breath, then suddenly told him to stop. In frustration, he threw the sword aside. He demanded that the nonsense end and insisted that the foolish act they were putting on should stop. He questioned why he had to be the one to kill him. Dean paused and let out a quiet sigh, telling him to stop crying. Dean instructed him to pick up the sword and do it again, just as they had rehearsed. He reminded him that what was done could not be undone. If Lyle, the village chief, wished to be recognized by the Elysium Temple, then he had to kill the superior Dark Lord who carried the titles of Lord of Nosferatu and Vampire Lord. Anger rose in Lyle as he questioned what Dean meant by Vampire Lord, pointing out that Dean had not even drunk blood once. Dean told him to calm himself. Dean had never once presented himself as a vampire. He had never claimed such a title. Yet it was undeniable that he was not the same as humans. Even he could not explain how he had come into existence. Before he realized it, he had simply appeared in this world and wandered through it alone. His blood carried magic power 10 billion times greater than that of an ordinary human. It constantly drew in the magic drifting through the world around him. Because of this, he did not age, nor was he touched by disease. While experimenting with his own blood and magic, the rumors began. Those who saw or heard of him started calling him a vampire. The name spread on its own. Dean remembered the days when villagers gathered outside an abandoned house within their territory, urging others to drive him out. They suspected a vampire had taken shelter there. Fear spread quickly, and suspicion followed. For 50 years, he was treated as a monster. He was chased away again and again, forced to wander from place to place. During those long years, he had no peaceful memories to hold on to. Then, after wandering for so long, he came upon a castle standing in a place much like this one. He wondered if anyone lived there. He wondered whether he might settle down at last. He also wondered how the nearby villagers would react. To his surprise, the villagers were carefree and welcoming. They were pleased that someone would finally live in the old castle. To them, it sounded like a good thing. These villagers accepted Dean without fear. They even made a chair resembling a throne for him. From that time onward, for 150 years, he conducted his experiments in peace. Over time, he became something more to them. He became the village's protective deity. As Lyle had said, Dean had done nothing evil. He had protected them. To the villagers, he was like a father who never aged. He was their family, their lord, and their teacher. Lyle could not understand why someone like that needed to die. Dean told him to stop crying or lamenting, reminding him that he was the firstborn son of the village head. If not for the disease that had spread, none of this would have happened. 1 year earlier, the disease struck the royal capital. Dark marks began to form across people's bodies. No matter what treatment was attempted, the fever only worsened with time. The great holy knight of the Elysium Temple stood before the people and told them there was no need to fear. They were instructed to place their faith in the Elysium Temple. To cure the disease, they were told to believe, to repent for their sins, and the darkness would be washed away. They were instructed to drink holy water, assured that an illness like this would be cured immediately. Soon after, a report reached the great holy knight. The number of infected continued to rise. Other regions were now suffering from the same disease, and those infected were dying one after another. The death toll had surpassed 10,000. There was no longer enough space to bury the dead. Upon hearing this, the great holy knight slammed his hand down in anger. He questioned what was happening, why none of their measures were working, and where the disease had originated. There was another matter as well. In a gorge region, there was a village called Fira. From there, no deaths had been reported. From Dean's perspective, There was no doubt that the illness spreading through the royal capital was Shinmonbyu. The parent of an infected child struggled to accept it. They had heard that countless people in the capital had died in a short time. Fear spread that the same fate could reach their village. Dean told them not to panic. He had studied preventive measures from epidemics in the past. Yet in his thoughts, he admitted that he had never encountered something like this before. The people of this village had little contact with the royal capital. It was possible that a messenger or runner traveling between regions had carried the disease back with them. He instructed that anyone suspected of being infected should be brought to the castle. Human diseases did not affect him, so he could tend to them without risk. Standing outside the castle, Dean addressed the gathered villagers and told them to listen carefully. He explained that epidemics of this kind were often airborne. Even someone with only a slight fever could spread it to others. He ordered them to wash their hands thoroughly and remain cautious. Dean handed out filter masks made from Ranamara grass to everyone in the village. He instructed them to wear the masks regularly so the air they breathed could be purified, and he reminded them to replace the filter each day. Not long after, Lyle hurried toward Dean with urgency. He reported that his daughter, Alice, had been infected. Without delay, they brought Alice to the castle. Dean asked Alice how she was feeling. She looked at him, and he reassured her that everything would be all right, that she would not die. Alice responded with a small smile, accepting his words. Her condition, however, was more severe than that of the others. Dean reminded her that she was a resident of Fira village, someone irreplaceable to him. Over time, he had come to see her as part of his family. Even for someone who had lived for 200 years, death remained unavoidable. When it involved family, the weight of it became heavier. The mistal blood flowed within Dean. It was his own blood, capable of serving as a medium for magic and containing strong purifying properties. He chose to bestow his blood upon Alice. Through that act, he succeeded in saving the village from Shinmonbyu. However, events did not end there. The great holy knight later spoke to Lyle, the village chief. He stated that he understood the situation and claimed that the being known as the Lord of Nosferatu had influenced their village. Afterward, one of the men questioned the great holy knight about the Lord of Nosferatu, asking if it truly referred to that monster. The great holy knight affirmed it. He explained that several hundred years ago, records had been preserved containing eyewitness accounts. In those records, the being was referred to as the Vampire Lord and the Solitary Demon Lord, a figure said to drink blood and manipulate magic, a terrifying existence. Yet the great holy knight described the discovery of this individual as a blessing. When asked what he meant, he explained that it was good news. The Shinmonbyu that had plagued humanity could be attributed to the Demon Lord. This truth, he declared, needed to be made known to the public. Later, Lyle slammed both hands onto the table, anger rising as he cursed the news that had reached them. The Elysium Temple was deliberately spreading word that his lord was the one responsible for the Shinmonbyu disease. The scroll declared that the residents of Freya village were under the influence of black magic, and that this was the reason they had been able to evade Shinmonbyu. When Lyle had tried to speak about Dean, he was told that if he wished to deny the testimony, there was only one way to prove it. He was instructed to take up the holy sword and kill Dean Nosferatu. Only then would the innocence of Fira village be acknowledged, as decreed by the royal family. Driven into desperation, Lyle turned to Dean and asked if there was any solution left regarding Shinmonbyu. Dean answered that if it had come to this, then Lyle should kill him. Lyle was left stunned. Dean observed that the village was now bound by the royal decree. He believed that both of them shared the same desire when it came to protecting the village. He reached out and patted Lyle, stating that by defeating him, the so-called Demon Lord, Lyle would gain the trust of the Elysium Temple before they could act themselves. He made this request not as a monster, but as someone asking the chief of Freya village to fulfill his duty. Lyle broke down, questioning why it had to be him who would kill his own lord. He thought of his daughter and wondered what he was supposed to tell Alice, who often spoke of wanting to become Dean's bride. Dean reminded him that she was still a child. When she grew older, Lyle should find her a human husband. Lyle pleaded with Dean to flee. The Elysium Temple was not an organization that could be easily deceived. If they began pursuing him, they would undoubtedly block every path and hunt him down. Dean explained that the Elysium Temple had long monopolized ancient magic and ancient artifacts. With those, they had built a powerful force. Through that strength, they had secured influence among royalty and nobles alike. Even if he himself might not be a match against them, Dean questioned how long Lyle believed he could withstand such power. In the end, he concluded that it would be better for Lyle to kill him. Time had run out. The holy knights of Elysium began slamming against the door, and soon they forced their way inside. Upon entering, they declared that they had come to purge Dean. Lyle, still shaken and hesitant, swung his sword. At that moment, Dean gave the order to move forward. He lunged toward Lyle and pressed him, challenging whether he truly believed he could win against him. Left with no other choice, Lyle forced his blade through Dean's body. The pain was sharper than Dean expected. For him, living alongside humans had not been unpleasant. He had never sired children of his own, yet having something that resembled a family had been enough. He told Lyle that he had gone to great trouble for his sake and urged him not to let that effort be wasted. Lyle answered that he understood. Then Dean pushed Lyle away. With composure, he acknowledged him as a hero. The pain continued to spread through his body. He began to suspect that perhaps he was not truly immortal after all. Quietly he waited. There was still more Lyle needed to do, and Dean remained standing for that final act. Lyle then raised his sword and declared that the evil magician Dean Nosferatu had been vanquished by him, Lyle Carmine, chief of the village. The holy knights nearby praised Lyle for his deed. For Dean, Lyle had done well. His own role ended here. What came next would rest entirely on Lyle's shoulders. He searched for the presence of his familiar bat, hoping it was still nearby. Knowing this outcome was possible, he had prepared a final measure. He intended to release his soul from his dying body and transfer it into the bat. But his body wavered. He collapsed, realizing something was wrong. He had not expected death to come so quickly. He could not cast the spell to transfer his consciousness. The plan failed. He had failed to conceal his existence. A large organization had discovered him, and this was the result. Once again, he felt as though he had failed. If he had revealed himself to more humans earlier, if he had allowed the world to know him, perhaps Lyle and the others would not have been drawn into this in such a peaceful village. Dean closed his eyes, preparing to depart. Then, after a few seconds, a voice reached him. It asked whether he wished to reincarnate. It stated that he had fulfilled the conditions necessary for reincarnation and could be reborn into this world once more. He wondered if such a thing was truly possible. An agreement was formed. The voice began to fade. Or perhaps it was his own consciousness that was fading. The voice informed him that he would be reincarnated as a human. It spoke of meeting again next time. Dean believed those would be his final words. Somewhere within his fading awareness, he sensed that Lyle had accepted everything. Even now, he did not fully understand it all. What remained clear was a memory. He remembered all of that in his 10th birthday. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this, help us reach 1,000 subscribers. One click equals instant power-up. Subscribe now. Back to the story. Chapter 2. Dean remembered the voice that once asked him whether he wished to reincarnate. Even now, he continued to question what that voice truly meant at that time. 3 years had passed since he regained the memories of Dean Nosferatu. Since then, he had slowly grown accustomed to carrying both his current memories and those from his previous life. He had lived in this present body for 13 years. In his former life, he had lived for 200. Over time, he came to accept both lives as his own. He had once been Dean Nosferatu, the Lord of Nosferatu, and the second son of Baron Yuki Grosseria. He remembered the moment after Kachel killed him. He had intended to transfer his soul into a bat familiar. To make that possible, he had spent time allowing the creature to grow accustomed to his blood. He had carefully prepared the necessary spells. Yet in the end, it was a complete failure. Even so, he refused to accept it as such. He convinced himself that it had been his first time casting that particular spell. He had never died before. Failure, he reasoned, could not be avoided under such circumstances. After the spell failed, he heard that voice. Soon after, his consciousness faded away. When he opened his eyes again, he had been born as a human. Curiosity lingered within him. He questioned who had reincarnated him and wondered how much time had passed since his death. The territory of this baron lay far from the royal capital. In truth, it was little more than countryside. The head of the Grosseria family had accepted him as an illegitimate child. George Grosseria was his father. There were also the legitimate children, his elder brother Zeros and his younger sister Rumia. Including himself, Yuki, there were 4 members in the family. Yuki had not been born from the late legitimate wife of the household. Because of that, he had no right to inherit the title. He understood that he would need to decide his own path. He considered which school he might attend once he left home, or whether he would have to become an adventurer instead. Before making any decision, he reminded himself that he first needed to learn more about humans. He reflected on his previous life and acknowledged that he had failed to fully integrate into human society. Before settling in the castle, he had been driven away as a monster. Later, he became the guardian deity of Fira village. That path ultimately led to his death. At present, he was not exactly human. The abilities from his previous life still remained within him. His blood was still mistal blood, and as he continued to grow, there would come a time when his aging would stop entirely. This time, he resolved to live while pretending to be human. While he was still a child, he would use the opportunity to study many things. By the time his aging ceased, he intended to have learned enough to blend naturally into human society. Yuki decided that he would use his magic to support that goal. Without warning, a small and charming bat appeared at his window. Yuki wondered whether it had come down from the mountains. As he thought about it, bats had always been drawn to him. Because of that, he had once been labeled the Lord of Vampires. Yuki picked up his dagger and considered that the timing was ideal. He asked the bat whether it wished to take part in an experiment. He made a small cut on his index finger, allowing a drop of blood to form. He explained that it was called mistal blood and that it was filled with magical power. He offered it to the bat, stating that if it drank the blood, it would become his kin and gain wisdom. The bat leaned forward and licked the small amount of blood from his finger. A sudden change ran through the bat's body. It jumped in clear excitement. It then addressed him as its master and expressed that it was pleased to meet him. The bat conveyed its gratitude for being allowed to share in his power and acknowledged that it could now speak. The bat lowered its head respectfully and expressed its wish to be of service, looking forward to fulfilling that role. Yuki responded that he himself had only recently awakened to his powers. Those who received his blood had the potential to become his valet. However, it required consent from both sides. It was not absolute domination. It was closer to a mutual exchange. He would grant a portion of his power, and in return, they would assist him. Yuki remarked that it might be somewhat early, yet he asked whether the bat knew of a place where they could test magic. The bat suggested the mountain where it lived and cautioned that they would need to remain careful, as monsters occasionally appeared there. Yuki then inquired about what kind of monsters could be found in that area. The bat explained that the creatures in the mountains included dark bears, night screech birds, and rage rabbits. Yuki considered this and concluded that if it was only those kinds of monsters, then it would not be a problem. From outside his room, the sound of light footsteps approached. Rumiya arrived at his door and knocked. She informed him that it was time to eat and that she had come herself to call him instead of Martha. Yuki questioned whether she had come all the way from the main building again and reminded her that Zeros had told her not to wander off on her own like that. Rumiya explained that she wanted to talk about how he had been lately as they made their way to the dining hall. As they walked, Rumiya spoke first. She described how she had woken up early in the morning, eaten breakfast, and prepared for school for the common folk. She mentioned that she read a few books as part of her routine. When it was Yuki's turn, he explained that their father had been teaching him swordsmanship, after which Zeros took over the lessons. He added that after lunch he practiced with a wooden sword. While listening to him, Rumiya began to feel unsettled. She then remarked that he should be more mindful of a woman's feelings. Yuki asked whether she was angry, and she quickly denied it. Yuki then extended his hand and indicated that he would walk with her the rest of the way. Rumiya accepted his hand, and the two of them continued together. As they walked, Yuki's attention was drawn to the wind outside. He observed that the wind in this place was unusually strong. He reflected that the building had already existed before their father established the Grosseria household there. He began to wonder whether there might be magic capable of dealing with such wind. Rumiya commented that having something like that would indeed be convenient. Yuki then considered whether the Lindobear Magic Guild, where his elder brother was connected, might possess something of that nature. The Lindobear Magic Guild was both a magic school and a research institute. It had grown into a large organization to ensure the continued enrollment of royalty and upper-class nobles. Children who entered the school were required to be recognized as nobility. It was said that trainees within the guild were taught powerful ancient magic. Yuki felt a quiet interest in it. However, the mention of ancient magic reminded him of the Elysium Temple, and he had no desire to become involved with anything connected to that place. Lost in his thoughts, Yuki barely noticed Rumiya calling out to him. She asked whether he had been listening. He apologized and admitted that his mind had wandered, then asked her to repeat what she had been saying. Rumiya explained that she had successfully memorized what she studied that day and asked him to pay attention. They spent time together as Rumiya practiced reciting poetry aloud. The way the words were pronounced was important, as proper pronunciation was necessary when forming chants used in magic. The poems chosen for practice appeared to be the same ones used long ago, unchanged from the past. Yuki reminded himself that he should not dwell on memories of his previous life. He recalled that he had once taught the children of that village. When he died, he had been in what was called a throne room, yet in truth it had felt no different from a classroom. At some point back then, the village's knowledge rating had reached 100%. The memory lingered briefly before fading. After a short while, Yuki informed Rumiya that their time together had ended. He needed to go to his own dining hall, while she was to return to the main building's dining hall. Rumiya became downcast, expressing her wish to eat together with him. Yuki stated that it was not possible, reminding her that she already understood the reason. A voice from nearby intervened, remarking that it was indeed improper for Lady Rumiya to act selfishly. The man added that she should be aware of her position, emphasizing that understanding one's place was essential for those involved with magic. The speaker was Kachel Mijen, a man hired by their father to oversee Zero's preparation for enrollment into the guild. Rumiya appeared frightened by his presence. Kachel directed his attention to Yuki and began explaining that people are born into predetermined social standings. Yuki responded by acknowledging this. He outlined the ranking according to species, from highest to lowest, humans first, followed by elves, and then beastmen. Intelligent monsters also possessed a hierarchy, with liches and vampires at the top, followed by the rest. Kachel fell silent in sudden surprise. After a brief pause, he calmly inquired about the ranking within the noble house. Yuki answered that if the question referred to the Grosseria family, then the highest position belonged to the head of the house, their father. Next came the true wife, their mother. After her was the elder brother, Zero's, followed by Rumiya. Beneath all of them stood the illegitimate child, which was himself, Yuki Grosseria. Kachel stated that Yuki was mistaken about one matter. In his view, as an illegitimate child, Yuki should not even bear the family name. Yuki remained composed and offered a calm apology for any rudeness. From behind him, Rumiya stepped forward to support her brother. She urged Kachel to correct himself, insisting that Yuki was her dear brother and a legitimate member of the Grosseria family. Kachel then shifted his gaze to Master Zero's and asked whether that claim was true. Zero's felt uneasy under the attention. Yuki quietly hoped his brother would not be forced to respond. However, Kachel pressed further, directly asking Zero's, the legitimate child of the noble family, what he thought about the matter and whether he had already forgotten the proper order. Zero's answered with visible strain. He declared that an illegitimate child was no different from the commoner parent. For a noble to share the same dining table with such a person was unacceptable, and it diminished one's higher status. Nobles, he stated, should at least maintain that level of self-awareness. A faint, villainous smile appeared on Kachel's face as he remarked that this was Zero's true opinion. Rumiya grew angered by what she had heard. Yuki gently patted Rumiya on the back and calmly urged her to return to her own dining room. He advised her to be careful not to eat at the place where he would be dining. Yuki then stated that he would take his meal at a different table together with Martha. Rumiya continued walking as tears fell from her eyes. She cried softly and expressed that she understood. As Kachel, Zero's, and Rumiya moved farther away, Yuki called out with one final question directed at Sir Kachel. He asked about the Elysium Temple, about the time when Elysium had discovered ancient magic artifacts, and how many years had passed since that event. At once, Kachel ground his teeth in anger. He turned back and shouted that speaking the name of the Elysium Temple in such a manner was taboo. Yuki's eyes widened at the reaction. Kachel let out a strained breath, almost a wheeze, before gradually regaining control of himself. After calming down, he stated that he would answer the question. He revealed that it had been 220 years since Elysium's discovery. Kachel added that his response was an act of mercy. Otherwise, Yuki might have gone on asking such ill-mannered questions to anyone he encountered. With that, they departed, leaving Yuki alone. He remained standing in quiet thought, unsettled by the realization that even the name of the Elysium Temple was considered taboo. It became clear to him that the world he had awakened into was still filled with many mysteries. Chapter 3. After finishing his meal, Yuki expressed his gratitude and remarked that it had been delicious, even wishing there had been a little more. The lady beside him explained that the food was simply what remained from the main building. The girl's name was Martha, a maid who lived away from the main mansion and took care of Yuki. Outside, Yuki saw his father together with Rumiya. Rumiya was practicing her magic while reciting her chant, and she managed to form a small sphere of lightning. Her father, George Grosseria, reacted with amazement at how she was now able to recite the chant correctly. Rumia credited her improvement to practice, and George acknowledged that such zeal was impressive. Rumia, however, noted that there were others who could accomplish even more remarkable things. As Yuki watched, he thought that Rumia's efforts were beginning to show results. George then demonstrated the spell himself, activating lightning and creating a much larger sphere. Both the chants and their effects remained the same as in the past. They had neither improved nor declined. It had been 220 years since the discovery made by the Elysian Temple. Yuki wondered if 200 years had truly passed since his death. It had been 220 years since the Elysian Temple uncovered ancient magic and artifacts, and he had died 20 years after that discovery. That meant 200 years had passed since he died. Lyle and Alice were no longer alive. Yuki let out a deep sigh, thinking that it could not be helped, though he still struggled to accept it. The name of the country had changed, yet the grammar of common magic remained the same, and the structure of society had not shifted either. He would normally have believed that this generation was much closer to his own time. Even now, ancient magic was reserved for a select few, its users belonging to the upper class. That was why Kachel displayed it so proudly. Meanwhile, Yuki's brother, Zeros, was preparing to join the Magic Guild as well. Yuki wondered what had taken place over the past 200 years and decided that he needed to uncover the truth for himself. The Elysian Temple had fallen from grace and was now treated as something taboo. He wanted to understand the reason behind that fall. At the same time, he had no desire to meet those people again. There was a library in the main building, and Yuki thought he might be able to find answers there. However, he quickly remembered that as an illegitimate child, he had no right to enter the main building so freely. If he wanted to gain access, he would need to come up with a plan. He then concluded that he should first experiment with his own abilities to support that plan. At the same time, he felt the desire to eat meat. That evening's dinner, as usual, had contained none. If he was going to test his magic anyway, he might as well go hunting. Before doing so, he decided to check his skills and then review his status on his own screen. His status was normally concealed. Once he entered school, it would likely be examined. His true status showed that he was 13 years old. His race was listed as unknown. His endurance, strength, and dexterity were ranked at B. His agility was ranked at A. His magic was ranked at S. His skills included float, mistal blood, conceal presence, ice magic, follower contract, comprehend language, erosion, and purification. He judged that these should be sufficient. In the middle of the night, he stepped out through his window and chanted the word for flight, activating float. This ability removed his weight and allowed him to hover. The guards did not notice his movement. Conceal presence appeared to be functioning properly as well. He resolved to return before morning. Yuki traveled farther until he reached the mountain. After some time, the small bat appeared and welcomed him with clear joy, having been waiting for his arrival. Yuki instructed the bat to find a suitable place where he could practice his magic and hunt animals. Before carrying out the request, the bat asked for its master's name. Yuki gave his name and then asked the bat for its own, only to learn that it had none. The bat requested that its master give it a name. After thinking for a moment, Yuki asked whether the name Dick would be acceptable. Dick reacted with clear happiness and expressed gratitude, considering it a good name. Yuki regarded it as the name of an old friend who had once been a father. He recalled memories from his past life. In those memories, Dick had expressed gratitude to him, to Dean, saying that he had lived a happy life. Dick had made one final request, asking him to look after his son, Lyle. The bat then observed that Yuki was still quite young. Yuki dismissed the concern and shifted the focus, asking what kind of prey they could catch in this area. From atop a tree, they spotted their target below, a large rabbit. The bat quietly pointed out that large rabbits were extremely cautious creatures. Yuki noted that their horns and kicks were powerful, at least according to what he remembered. He made it clear that he would not engage in close combat. A faint grin appeared as he reminded himself that this was an opportunity to experiment with his magic. Dick expressed concern that flames would be too bright and that wind magic would create too much noise. Yuki reassured him that there was no need to worry, as his specialty was ice magic. Placing his hand against the tree, Yuki activated a freezing net. Ice began to spread downward from the trunk, creeping silently along the ground. It reached the large rabbit and froze one of its feet in place. The rabbit attempted to leap away, but it was already trapped, caught by the spreading frost. Yuki's magic proved ideal for traps and stealth. It created no noise and emitted no light, ensuring that targets were captured before they even realized what was happening. As the frozen vines drew the large rabbit closer, Yuki lifted his dagger. He quietly expressed apology in his thoughts before driving the blade into it. Moments later, he hung the rabbit up to allow the blood to drain. Dick reacted with clear excitement, praising Yuki's skill and admitting that even he would not be able to escape magic like that. Yuki regarded it as nothing more than simple magic. However, Dick insisted that it was far from ordinary, emphasizing that it produced neither light nor sound, making it undetectable even to prey. In the mountains, such magic was the most reliable for survival. Even so, Yuki concluded that it still could not compare to ancient magic. Yuki had witnessed the ancient magic of the Elysian Temple in the past. The memory resurfaced clearly in his mind. Two thieves had fallen to their knees, apologizing and begging for their lives before a priest. They promised they would never steal again. One of the men desperately asked to be spared. The priest refused. Without hesitation, he cast a spell that ended both of their lives. He declared that the Elysian Temple could not overlook those who disrupted the order of society. Dean Nosferatu had stood there and watched as the priest erased the entire bandit group in a single motion. It had been overwhelming. Ordinary magic required chance and the channeling of internal power to take effect. Yuki's ice magic was simplified, allowing him to cast it repeatedly with efficiency. However, ancient magic was on a different level. It could be unleashed one after another without even consuming magic power. Those who wielded it were relentless, specializing in combat magic without mercy. That was precisely why, in his previous life as Dean Nosferatu, he had avoided confronting the Elysian Temple directly. Yuki reflected that if he had possessed stronger magic back then, Lyle would not have been forced to kill him. In the present era, ancient magic was controlled by the Magic Guild. Even just thinking of Kachel made him uneasy. It was an organization he had no desire to involve himself with. Dick pulled him out of his thoughts and called his attention to something else, informing him that his allies had located another large rabbit. Yuki questioned the mention of allies. Dick explained that once he had spoken about his master, the others had become eager to join. When Yuki looked upward, he saw numerous bats flying above. A faint smile formed on his face as he found the sight impressive. Dick expressed his desire for everyone to understand how remarkable Master Yuki truly was. With visible excitement, Dick explained that his allies were aware of everything that happened throughout the mountain. He conveyed that if Yuki wished to claim dominion over the mountain, he only needed to give the word. Yuki gently patted Dick and expressed his appreciation, acknowledging him as an excellent follower. Dick regarded it as an honor to receive praise from his master. It became clear to Yuki that he now had complete information about the mountain. The timing felt ideal. He decided that this mountain would serve as his base of operations. He then instructed Dick to select several other bats to act as contacts. If a monster too powerful for Dick appeared, or if hostile forces or intruders entered the area, they were to report directly to Yuki. When such a moment came, he would personally use his strength. Dick expressed gratitude for the trust placed in him. Afterward, he guided Yuki toward the next large rabbit. Yuki reviewed his abilities once more: Mistle Blood, Float, Conceal Presence, Ice Magic, Follower Contract Comprehends Language, and confirmed that he could use them all. He intended to rely on these powers while continuing to present himself as nothing more than an ordinary human. As he considered how much more he could hunt before returning home, he reminded himself that everything he was doing was part of his plan to gain entry into the main building. Chapter 4. After that night, Yuki returned to the mansion. Kachel was already there, standing as if he had been waiting. He confronted Yuki at once, questioning what he thought he was doing. Kachel addressed him as Lord Yuki, and Yuki responded by calling him Sir Kachel. A faint smirk crossed Yuki's face, and he quietly thought that this reaction was exactly what he had expected. Yuki explained that he had gone hunting. He told Sir Kachel that he had brought back the prey he caught using the trap he had set in the mountains. He intended to ask Martha to cook it for him. Sir Kachel demanded how he dared to do such a thing. Yuki answered calmly, explaining that he lived far from the main mansion and had very little meat to eat, so he decided to treat himself for once. Sir Kachel sharply accused Yuki of being selfish, calling him a commoner. In a cutting tone, he reminded Yuki that he was an illegitimate child and practically a servant. He stated that when a servant goes hunting, the proper thing to do is to present the prey to the master. He added that Yuki should learn to behave like the other servants. Yuki turned his back on him and continued walking, saying that he needed to have his meat processed and asking to be excused. Kachel shouted in irritation, declaring that he was not finished yet. At that moment, Lord George approached from nearby and asked what was going on. He seemed pleased to see Yuki and inquired about where he was heading. Yuki explained that he had been hunting in the mountains. Kachel, still unsatisfied, interrupted and urged Lord George to listen, pointing out that Sir Yuki intended to claim the prey for himself. Lord George responded by stating that if Yuki caught it, then it belonged to him. He acknowledged the 2 large rabbits Yuki had captured and remarked that it was impressive, noting that catching such daring large rabbits was a great achievement. He observed that Yuki possessed considerable talent. Yuki then thanked his father. Lord George had been granted nobility because of his mastery in martial arts. Even after receiving his title, he never neglected his training. Despite his busy schedule, he still found time to acknowledge Yuki's efforts. Having lived a previous life without anyone to call father, Yuki felt a quiet attachment to Lord George and held a sincere fondness for him. Lord George reminded Yuki not to push himself too hard, warning that the mountains were home to many dangerous beasts. Kachel, however, remained dissatisfied. He stated that he could not accept what had just happened. He argued that praising what he viewed as selfish behavior from the illegitimate Yuki, rather than correcting him, was inappropriate. He questioned whether such encouragement was truly fitting for an aristocrat. Lord George responded that he saw nothing wrong. His child had gone hunting and successfully caught wild animals, and he believed there was nothing improper about appreciating that effort. Kachel countered by asking if Lord George had forgotten the terms of hiring him. He reminded him that he had pledged to do everything within his power to ensure that Lord Zeros would become a member of the Lindbell Magician Guild. In return, Lord George had agreed not to interfere with his methods of teaching. Kachel emphasized that this had been the condition they both accepted. Lord George acknowledged that this was true. He stated that he understood and decided that he would take his leave and return to the royal capital. At that moment, Yuki stepped forward and admitted that he was in the wrong. He stated that he lacked proper understanding of his position and discipline. He then presented the 2 large rabbits to his father. After doing so, he respectfully requested permission to enter the library as compensation for his conduct. Yuki explained that, as Sir Kachel had pointed out, he had yet to fully understand his place, and gaining knowledge would help make up for that shortcoming. Lord George trembled slightly, surprised that Yuki had thought so far ahead. Yuki only smiled quietly, though inwardly he acknowledged that everything was proceeding according to his plan. If he had entered through the main gate, Sir Kachel would have surely continued to scold him. Over the past 3 years, Yuki had carefully memorized his father's training schedule, ensuring that Lord George would be nearby to hear any disturbance. With every detail calculated, the plan had unfolded exactly as intended. Lord George granted Yuki permission to enter the library without hesitation. He then turned to Kachel and pointed out that since Yuki had admitted his shortcomings in that manner, there should be no reason to object. Kachel appeared unsettled. Though unwilling, he had no room to refuse and forced himself to agree. Later, inside the mansion, Yuki allowed himself a quiet sense of satisfaction. His plan had succeeded exactly as intended. As he approached the library, he noticed Sir Kachel stepping out from within. Their eyes met briefly. Yuki observed him carefully, wondering what he had been doing there. Butler Neil greeted Yuki and informed him that he had been expecting him. Lord George had already explained the situation. Neil had served the mansion for many years. It was said that in his youth, he had accompanied George onto the battlefield and fought alongside him. Yuki asked Neil whether Kachel had been there moments earlier. Neil did not respond directly to that question. Instead, he remarked that he had little understanding of being a tutor and asked Yuki what kind of book he wished to read. There were only a limited number of books available. Books were valuable possessions. Yuki requested books about the history of the country. Neil reacted with mild curiosity, questioning whether Yuki could read them. Yuki answered that he could, to some extent. Yuki attempted to open one of the bookshelves but struggled. He informed Neil that it would not open. Neil replied that he had already unlocked it. Yuki tried again and pointed out that it still would not open. His attention shifted to the locking mechanism. He realized that the door had been secured using a magical tool. He paused, suddenly recalling that Kachel had just come from the library. After Neil took his leave, Yuki understood that complaining to him would accomplish nothing. Confronting Sir Kachel directly would only create unnecessary conflict and potentially damage the family's reputation, especially within aristocratic society. Yuki found himself troubled. He struggled to understand human behavior, and the realization left him feeling unsettled. To think that Kachel would go so far as to prevent him from reading by using a magical device weighed on him. Still, he had no alternative. It had been some time since he last used this kind of magic. Without hesitation, he sliced his index finger and allowed it to bleed. Activating Mistal blood hacking, he used his blood, infused with magical power, to interfere with and break the magic placed upon the lock. It followed the same principle as when he had used his blood to cure Alice from the Shinmubu disease. The internal structure of the spell was carefully analyzed, confirming that the magical lock had been placed on the bookshelf door. He began interfering with the flow of magical power that sustained it. After disrupting the supply, he successfully unlocked the bookshelf. Yuki made a mental note to restore the lock later. Not long after, Neil stepped inside once more and brought tea for Yuki. His eyes briefly shifted to the book Yuki was reading. Yuki indicated that it was unnecessary, as he did not want the tea to spill onto the book. Neil's gaze then moved to the lock on the shelf. The magical tool was positioned upside down, a result of Yuki hastily placing it back. Neil remarked that perhaps even a tutor could make mistakes. Yuki responded lightly, as if considering the possibility. Neil then observed that the seal on the shelf resembled a spell he had encountered long ago on the battlefield. At that time, it had taken 3 magicians working together to break it. Yuki pointed out that if such a spell could not be undone by a single person, then it would suggest that Sir Kachel had been responsible for placing it. Yuki asked Neil whether he held any resentment toward Sir Kachel. Neil quickly claimed that his words had merely slipped out and insisted that someone as capable as the tutor would never commit such an act. With that, Yuki returned his focus to his reading. After an hour had passed, Yuki had learned about the Elysium Temple. They had once discovered and declared a land as their holy ground. They were known as a magical organization that wielded ancient spells and ancient magical artifacts as weapons, building a strong reputation through their power. Yet despite their influence, Yuki found himself questioning how such an organization could simply vanish. Yuki questioned whether the Elysium Temple truly possessed such overwhelming power. As he compared them to ordinary humans, he wondered what humanity had been doing during that time. The records explained that the cause of their downfall began when the Elysium Temple interfered in territorial disputes among small kingdoms. During that period, a struggle for authority arose within the organization itself, dividing it into several factions. Each faction aligned with different kings and entered wars against various countries. With ancient magic and powerful magical items in their possession, victory should have come easily. However, once the wars began, their magical weapons suddenly ceased functioning. No one understood why their weapons stopped working. Even so, the kingdoms already engaged in battle did not withdraw their armies. When the wars finally ended, the anger and resentment of the people shifted toward the Elysium Temple. Having become the common enemy of many nations, the Elysium Temple was eventually annihilated. Most of the magical items they once controlled disappeared without a trace. Later, as Yuki lay in bed, he reflected on the matter. He thought that people of the current era could have attempted to replicate those magical tools and use them to live more comfortably. He imagined simple conveniences, such as an item that produced warm water when a faucet was turned, or a blanket that maintained warmth during sleep. The idea of destroying a holy sword during excavations struck him as foolish. He considered that such actions caused more trouble for humans than even the Lord of Nosferatu. In the end, Yuki found no information about Fira village. The history book only recorded that the Elysium Temple had been destroyed and that the Lindbell Magician Guild had taken responsibility for overseeing ancient magic to prevent a similar incident from happening again. An image of Alice surfaced in his mind. Yuki concluded that if he wished to learn more, he would need to travel to the royal capital. The libraries there were larger, and historians would likely be present. There, he might uncover the whereabouts of Fira village and its people. Yuki began to consider what he should do next. He saw 2 possible paths before him. The first option was to leave the house and enroll in a school. Since he would not become the head of the Grossaria family, he could travel to the royal capital and study there, learning the common knowledge of this world in a proper institution. After completing his studies, he could become an adventurer, moving from place to place. By constantly traveling, he would be able to conceal the fact that he was immortal, regardless of his actions or where he originally came from. The second option was to leave the house and search for the ruins of Fira village. The war had broken out after he died as dead Nosferatu. If he could locate a descendant of Alice, there was a possibility he might uncover useful information. As he reflected further, Yuki realized that he might not need to choose only one path. It seemed possible to pursue both plans. He concluded that he should consult his father about it later. At that moment, a loud voice from outside interrupted his thoughts, offering congratulations to Lord Zeros. Drawn by curiosity, Yuki looked out through the window. Below, he saw a red carriage, clearly a post carriage. Lord George noticed him at the window and indicated that his timing was perfect. He instructed Yuki to come downstairs, explaining that there was important news for Zeros and that he wanted Yuki to hear it as well. Chapter 5. Sir Kachel was in high spirits. A clear smile rested on his face as he looked at Yuki, expressing that he should feel proud to have been blessed with such an exceptional elder brother. Yuki stood unsettled, struggling to believe what he was seeing. He had never witnessed Sir Kachel in such a bright and pleased mood before. Lord George then directed a question toward Yuki, asking whether he knew about the Lindbell Magician Guild, as they had just delivered remarkable news for Zeros. Yuki observed that his father also appeared unusually pleased. With that in mind, he turned his attention to Zeros and asked if he had become an apprentice at the Magician Guild. Zeros clarified that this was not the case. Instead, Zeros explained that Her Royal Highness, the 8th Princess Iris Risha, would be coming personally to see him demonstrate his power. Yuki was unaware of this development. Zeros further revealed that Her Royal Highness herself was going to become an apprentice. Yuki pointed out that even members of the royal family joined the Magician Guild. From that, he questioned whether Her Royal Highness was visiting as a representative of the guild to evaluate his brother Zero's abilities. Zeros responded with clear admiration, acknowledging that Yuki had phrased the situation accurately. In Yuki's thoughts, he recalled how Sir Kachel had often spoken to him in a similar manner before. He then questioned why someone of royal status would come all the way to visit a baron. Sir Kachel, filled with pride, credited the outcome to his relentless efforts in writing letters of recommendation. He added that results like this would never come without possessing at least the level of power that Lord Zeros held. A strong magical aptitude was essential for anyone who wished to become an apprentice at the Magician Guild that oversaw ancient magic. Her Royal Highness had qualified because her aptitude was exceptionally high. Furthermore, she had been appointed as the person responsible for conducting the test on this occasion. Zeros stated that such a visit was a rare occurrence. Kachel followed by explaining that everything was arranged to properly measure the true extent of Lord Zero's abilities. After saying this, Kachel paused. His gaze shifted sideways toward Lord George, who stood nearby, before he pointed directly at Yuki. He instructed Yuki to remain at home and not step outside on the day Her Royal Highness would arrive. Yuki immediately questioned the instruction. Kachel answered without restraint, stating that they could not allow a bastard to appear before Her Royal Highness. He firmly ordered Yuki not to leave the house under any circumstances, and without hesitation he went as far as saying that he would prefer Yuki not to breathe at all. Zeros and Lord George were both taken aback and asked whether he truly meant what he was saying. Kachel dismissed their reactions with a wave of his hand and told them to remain quiet. He then turned to Lord Zeros and instructed him to repeat the same words to Yuki. Zeros questioned the demand. Kachel pressed further, asking whether someone who could not even make his own bastard younger brother obey him could truly master magic. He then added that perhaps they should introduce Lord Yuki to Her Royal Highness instead. With that remark, Kachel deliberately emphasized that Yuki was Zero's bastard younger brother, placing them on equal standing in a way meant to provoke resentment. A visible frustration began to form on Zero's face. Zeros had inherited his blonde hair from their father, while his blue eyes came from both his father and his father's lawful wife. His appearance closely resembled their father's. For that reason, Yuki found it impossible to direct hatred toward him. Even so, against his own will, Zeros addressed Yuki and explained that Her Royal Highness belonged to the royal bloodline of this country. For someone of common birth to present themselves before such a person would be considered an unforgivable act. Kachel urged him to state it more clearly. He followed with a pointed question, asking what Lord Yuki should do now. Zeros continued, forcing himself to speak. He stated that Yuki had been born from an unknown common woman whom their father had encountered on the battlefield. A person of such origin, he concluded, was not permitted to stand within the sight of Her Royal Highness. Zeros suddenly raised his voice and firmly declared that Yuki must remain inside his room without fail on the designated day. Yuki responded with a quiet smile and agreed willingly. Inwardly, Yuki reflected that he had no desire to involve himself with the princess or the royal family in the first place. In his thoughts, he recalled how they would command adventurers to defeat the Demon King while offering only small rewards. He remembered that they had once come to his place before, including someone who called himself a hero. His mind drifted to a distant memory. A woman adventurer had once arrived at his place and stumbled there. He had given her food and calmly explained that he meant her no harm. After that encounter, she devoted herself to serving as a guard of Fira village. That woman was Lyle's grandmother. Returning to the present, Yuki felt a sense of nostalgia. He then calmly stated his intentions. He assured Zeros that there was no need for concern. On the designated day, he would close his curtains as Zeros wished so that Her Royal Highness would not see him. He added that if Zeros still felt uneasy, he could simply stay overnight at the town's inn. He even suggested that he could leave on a short journey with their father's permission. Lord George, weighed down with remorse, apologized to Yuki. Even if it was for the sake of advancing into the ranks of higher aristocracy, having a son of George speak in such a manner troubled him. Yuki began to wonder what was wrong with his father. Zeros then clarified that he had only instructed Yuki not to show himself on the day of the examination. He pointed out that staying at the town's inn or leaving on a journey sounded like sarcasm. Yuki became confused and stated that such an interpretation was not his intention. In truth, Yuki was trying to support his brother. In his previous life, he had longed for an older family member, and that feeling still lingered within him. Determined to prevent any misunderstanding, Yuki resolved to make himself clear. Raising his voice, he stated that he had no interest whatsoever in the Magician Guild or in Her Royal Highness. He was satisfied with living within the barony and had no wish to risk meeting her. He simply wanted to be of use. His words struck sharply, carrying the weight of something precise and direct. Yuki then calmly explained that if he were to meet Her Royal Highness, there might be certain formal etiquette that his father had not yet taught him, which could cause him to make mistakes. He apologized, saying that if he were to embarrass himself before someone of such status, their family might become a source of ridicule among other aristocrats. Meanwhile, Zeros stood there, visibly holding back his emotions. Yuki continued, adding that he had no interest in ancient magic. He stated that the destruction of the Elysium Temple itself was proof that power alone was not the answer to everything. With that said, he assured them once more that on the designated day, he would not cause any trouble. He would simply pray for Zero's success in joining the guild as his brother. At that moment, Zeros suddenly lost control and raised his voice, telling Yuki not to be foolish. He repeated the phrases Yuki had used, taking chances, being useful, becoming a laughingstock, and interpreted them as something else entirely. Zeros felt as though he was being looked down upon. He questioned whether Yuki was implying that he was unworthy of entering the Magician Guild. Yuki was startled by the reaction and could not understand how the situation had turned in that direction. Zeros continued, saying that as an illegitimate child, Yuki should be grateful that he was even allowed to step inside the mansion, yet he continued to look down on him. Lord George stepped forward and firmly told Zeros to stop, stating that there was no way Yuki had meant such a thing. Zeros trembled. He then declared that he wanted to show his power to Yuki. Lord George questioned what he meant. Zeros explained that he wished to demonstrate how strong he truly was, to prove to Yuki the might of ancient magic. At that point, Sir Kachel spoke. He addressed Lord George and stated that he had a request. Since Sir Yuki likely did not understand the true value of ancient magic, and in order to avoid appearing impolite within aristocratic society, he believed it was necessary to properly beat the power of ancient magic into Sir Yuki. Zeros turned toward his father and pleaded with him. Lord George answered that he understood and that he would personally determine how strong Zeros had become. He then ordered someone to bring his practice sword. It was decided that Zeros would engage in a mock battle with him. Yuki stepped forward and volunteered, but Lord George instructed him to remain where he was and observe the fight between him and Zeros. Lord George then informed Sir Kachel that the servants were strictly forbidden from entering, as they were not to witness ancient magic. He asked whether that arrangement was acceptable. Kachel expressed his gratitude. Kachel then offered to act as the judge of the match. The rules were set clearly. The first person to drop their sword would be declared the loser. Both Lord George and Zeros agreed. The fight began. Zeros made the first move. He traced a rune in the air with precision. His voice rang out as he invoked the spell and called it forth. As Yuki observed, he noticed that he could not hear the incantation clearly. It differed from the magic he had encountered before. Nearby, Kachel openly praised Zeros. The moment the spell casting was complete, Zeros surged forward toward Lord George. Both Yuki and Lord George were taken aback by the sudden burst of speed. Zero's sword strike forced his father to step back. With general magic, physical strength could only be enhanced by a small margin, perhaps a few % at most. Given the clear difference in body size between father and son, the boost Zero's displayed had to be far greater than that. As the clash continued, Lord George commended Zero's movements and asked whether this was the result of his studies. Zero's affirmed that it was. Through ancient magic, he claimed he could now fight on equal footing with him. Zero's turned toward Yuki and directed his attention to the display, making it clear that this was his power. As Yuki watched, he reflected inwardly that such strength was beyond ordinary understanding. With this level of ability, Zero's would undoubtedly rise to a high position within Gross Arya. From Yuki's perspective, his brother surpassed their father in both strength and speed. The only reason Lord George could stand evenly against him was due to his years of combat experience. At that moment, Yuki understood why the Lindbell Magician Guild had taken control over the management of ancient magic. It was simply too powerful and too frightening for the general public to wield. This, Yuki realized, was ancient magic. He himself did not understand magical theory, nor did he know how to properly chant a spell. It occurred to him that ancient magic might even be a language of its own. While seated, Yuki carefully observed his brother's finger movements. He committed each motion to memory, determined to attempt it himself. Quietly, Yuki traced the rune onto his own palm. The instant he completed it, he felt something shift within him. A sudden sensation spread through his limbs, growing warm, almost burning. Power surged from deep inside his body, startling him. For a brief moment, it felt as though he were returning to being the Lord of Nosferatu. Dean Nosferatu. The realization came quickly that remaining there would be dangerous. He apologized to both his brother and his father, claiming that he felt unwell, and then left. His father called after him, asking whether he was all right. Zero's also called out and immediately went after him, insisting that he stay and witness his power. Yuki could not understand why Zero's was chasing him, especially while still in his enhanced state. Yuki knew that he could not allow himself to be caught. His speed increased abruptly. Zero's was stunned by Yuki's sudden burst of speed. Even with his magical enhancement, he found himself unable to close the distance. Confusion grew as Yuki pulled farther ahead. Then, in one swift motion, Yuki leapt upward toward a nearby window. Zero's arrived moments later, only to find that Yuki had already vanished. Meanwhile, Yuki stared at the rune etched into his palm. He struggled to believe that he had successfully invoked ancient magic, even though he had drawn the crest using only his own blood. Chapter 6. Later, Sir Kachel noticed that Zero's appeared unsettled. He asked what was troubling him. Zero's admitted that he could not catch Yuki, and he wondered aloud whether Yuki had also used magic. Sir Kachel responded that such a thing was impossible. Ancient magic relied on predetermined spells and chants. Furthermore, using it required a steady and continuous flow of internal magic power. Anyone who had not been properly taught could not possibly wield it. Despite that explanation, Zero's remained dissatisfied. Kachel leaned closer to him and reminded him that he himself had only recently managed to use enhancement boosts. He pointed out that Zero's likely still could not control that power perfectly. Even so, he believed Zero's should be more than capable of overwhelming the mock battle. Zero's clenched his fist, still troubled, and admitted that there were moments when he felt he could not defeat Yuki. Kachel stated that they would discuss that concern later. For now, he declared that he would demonstrate that the so-called problem would amount to nothing before Lord Zero's true ability, as it rightfully should. Zero's accepted those words and agreed. Meanwhile, from the window, Yuki had been quietly peeking. He reflected that the situation had been a close call. He remained seated in his room, watching as the rune on his palms gradually faded. He thought about how unexpected it was that merely drawing the symbol had been enough to activate the spell. In his previous life, whenever he needed to write a memo, he would cut his index finger and write either on his own hand or on parchment paper. Lyle used to laugh at him and remark that such habits were the reason he was called a vampire. Remembering this, Yuki concluded that he needed to investigate ancient magic more thoroughly. Afterward, Yuki apologized to Martha for startling her earlier while she had been undressed. Martha responded by questioning whether that was truly the proper thing to say after suddenly leaping into the room while she had been changing clothes. She reminded him of how surprised she had been. Yuki expressed his sincere apology. Martha then admitted that she had felt relieved the moment she realized it was him. Yuki began to comment that being comfortable with such a situation was somewhat unusual, but Martha cut him off before he could finish and reassured him that it was all right. She explained that she had already pledged her loyalty to Lord Yuki. Martha went on to explain that when her mother fell ill and was forced to leave her work at the barony, it was Lord Yuki who spoke to his own father to have her employed instead. If that had not happened, she believed that she and her mother might have ended up living on the streets. In those earlier days, Martha's mother had been the only one willing to properly look after Yuki. There was no way he could abandon his childhood friend, Martha. At that time, the barony had also been more forgiving and relaxed, before Sir Kachel's arrival changed its atmosphere. Yuki then wondered whether it was too much of a burden for Martha to continue taking care of him while being stationed so far from the main mansion. Martha reminded him that he frequently visited her mother regardless. He admitted that he had grown tired of remaining inside the mansion constantly. Aside from that, there was hardly anyone there he could truly talk to. Martha shared that she had noticed her mother's condition improving whenever Lord Yuki came to visit. Yuki dismissed it as mere coincidence. Martha questioned that thought quietly, leaving the idea lingering between them. Even so, she stated once more that her loyalty belonged to Lord Yuki. He remarked that she could be quite stubborn and admitted that he had never truly thought of Martha as a servant. Martha responded that this was something Yuki had always told both her and her mother. Yuki explained that although he was constantly watched by his older brother and Sir Kachel, to him, Martha was simply a friend with whom he shared life in this mansion. A small smile formed on Martha's face, and the two of them bumped their fists together. She acknowledged his words and accepted them as he had said. After that, Yuki asked whether she truly had nothing to say about the fact that he had just entered through a second-floor window. Martha replied that she was fully aware of how capable Lord Yuki was. Yuki reacted with mild curiosity at that answer. Martha recalled how, in the past, Lord Yuki had always protected her when she was a crybaby. He would chase away insects with magic and heal her burned hand without hesitation. After doing such things, he would always quietly insist that it remain their secret. Now, Martha reflected that she carried many secrets because of him. Yuki apologized for placing that weight on her. In response, Martha repeated that this time as well, it would remain another secret between them. Yuki agreed and told her that he was relying on her once more. After that, Martha told Yuki that since they were already discussing such matters, she brought up the fact that he had been peeking at her while she was changing clothes. She asked whether he had anything to say about that. Yuki answered that he was fully aware of how beautiful Martha was. In response, Martha offered, as a gesture of gratitude, to wash Yuki's hair. Yuki quickly refused, explaining that it was unnecessary since he had only recently washed it. While they were still in the middle of their conversation, Lord George arrived. He informed Yuki that once Her Royal Highness arrived, he would allow Yuki to stay at the town's inn. In truth, Yuki did not need to go that far. Lord George added that Yuki could simply remain in his room and keep the window closed. He mentioned that this had been the suggestion of the tutor sent from the Magician Guild, though he was visibly trembling as he said it. Yuki calmly told his father that he did not mind the arrangement at all. Yuki then stood and stated that Martha would accompany him as well, assuring Lord George that there was nothing to worry about. Without warning, Lord George pulled Yuki into an embrace and apologized. He called himself a fool and admitted that he did not feel suited to be an aristocrat. He expressed regret that his own son had to take on such a burden. Yuki felt uncomfortable and pointed out that Martha was watching. Martha turned her back and claimed that she was not, encouraging Lord Yuki to continue. Yuki accepted the moment as it was. He had always believed that it was his role to comfort a child. Yet at that moment he realized that being the one comforted was not such a bad thing. In his previous life, Yuki had no parents. Now, however, he had a father, his little sister Rumia, and his older brother Zeros. Along with Martha, those bonds alone were enough to make him feel grateful that he had been reincarnated as a human. Once they had settled down, Yuki thanked his father and assured him that he would be fine. Lord George replied that arrangements would be made so that nothing would become inconvenient later. He then instructed Martha to take good care of Yuki. Yuki felt moved and said that his father's words alone were already enough for him. Martha declared that Lord Yuki could be left in her care. Together, they showed their respect as Lord George took his leave. Meanwhile, inside Zero's room, Sir Kachel asked whether he was still thinking about what had happened with Lord Yuki. Zeros admitted that he was. Sir Kachel stated once again that Lord Yuki could not possibly use ancient magic. Only those who were chosen had the ability to wield such power. Zeros replied that he understood, yet the matter continued to trouble him. Sir Kachel released a quiet sigh and said that he understood Lord Zero's caution toward Lord Yuki. He then asked whether Zeros had noticed Lord Baron's reaction earlier. The Baron had appeared more concerned about Lord Yuki, and it seemed to Kachel that he had been drawn in by that bastard. Kachel claimed this was proof that Lord Yuki was aiming to overtake Zeros as the rightful heir. Hearing this, Zeros felt diminished, and Kachel immediately warned him not to ignore such signs. Kachel continued by saying that Lord Yuki was steadily turning servants into allies. Just the other day, he had attempted to offer the prey he hunted to his servant. According to Kachel, the intention behind those actions was obvious. He insisted that there was no telling what might happen if Yuki was not stopped. Zeros grew uneasy and questioned whether Yuki truly intended to overtake him. Kachel answered that such struggles were common within aristocratic families. With a hardened tone, Kachel stated that a bastard attempting to seize control of the very family that raised him, simply because he believed himself slightly superior to the true heir, was unforgivable. He insisted that they needed to demonstrate that Zero's true strength far surpassed anything Yuki possessed. Shifting his manner, Kachel spoke to Lord Zeros as though he were his only ally. He declared that he stood solely on Zero's side. He described the bastard Yuki as a pest within the barony, someone attempting to take it over. Then Kachel adopted a pitiful demeanor, claiming that he trusted Lord Zeros completely, even if his own body, lacking high magic power, might not seem worthy of that trust. Zeros immediately denied that notion and assured him that he trusted Sir Kachel. In response, Kachel allowed a faint grin to appear. Sir Kachel then instructed Zeros to repeat his words while holding the amulet he had given him. He told him to declare that Yuki Grossaria was his enemy, a common enemy who must be confronted no matter what. Forced into it, Zeros repeated the words as instructed. In that moment, he was completely under Kachel's control. Kachel firmly believed that no matter what Lord Yuki attempted, he would never prevail against Lord Zeros. With that confidence, he felt certain that when the designated day of the test arrived, Lord Zeros would succeed without fail. After some time, Lord Yuki encountered Neil near the staircase. Neil mentioned that the timing was fortunate, as he needed to pass along a message from his lord. He informed Yuki that Her Royal Highness would arrive in 5 days. Yuki would be permitted to stay at the Towns Inn starting the day before her arrival. From the following evening onward, Yuki was also prohibited from going to the mountain, as it had been selected as one of the candidate sites for the test. Yuki smiled lightly and acknowledged the information, concluding that the mountain had effectively become a restricted area. Although he had planned to experiment further with ancient magic, he accepted that it could not be helped. He quietly decided that he would slip out of the mansion again that night. Until then, he would verify what he could inside his room. Brother Zeros cast ancient magic by drawing a crest in the air and chanting a spell. Yuki carefully observed and recalled the movement of Zero's finger as it traced the crest. However, he did not know the words that had been chanted. It was likely a separate language used exclusively for ancient magic. Yuki himself had only drawn the crest without chanting a single word, yet he had still managed to activate enhancement boosts. Even now, he did not understand why that had happened. He began organizing his thoughts from the beginning. In this world, there existed general magic and the ancient magic discovered by the Elysium Temple. The primary differences between them were power and the consumption of magic energy. In both aspects, ancient magic was 3 times superior. Brother Zeros, after using enhancement boosts, was capable of fighting on equal footing with their father, a seasoned veteran warrior. When Yuki drew the same crest his brother had used, his body suddenly felt lighter. The question that lingered in his mind was why his magic had activated in that manner. He decided to test it on parchment paper. First, he tried using ordinary ink. He carefully drew the rune, but nothing happened. The result was complete silence. Next, he chose to use mistal blood, just as he had done before. He used a pen and drew the crest with his own blood. After a few seconds, the magic activated. Yuki immediately felt his body grow lighter again. He could also move with remarkable speed. He considered jumping to further test the effect, but before he could do much more, the boost faded. It had lasted for roughly 10 minutes. Once the magic contained within the blood was depleted, the crest itself disappeared. By observing the state of the crest, he realized he could estimate how much time remained before the effect ended. However, the blood he had drawn onto the parchment did not react at all. From this, he concluded that parchment could not serve as a medium for the boost. He reasoned that his mistal blood must be the key factor. To confirm his suspicion, he opened his status screen. Yuki was startled when he saw that he had gained an additional skill. He questioned what this meant, because until now, he had never possessed a skill related to ancient magic. In his previous life, he had never used ancient magic. Instead, he had been killed by an ancient item known as the Holy Sword. He began to wonder whether that holy sword from his previous life was the cause. His blood was part of his very being. At the moment of his death, the holy sword had been covered in his blood. That meant he had died while connected to an ancient artifact. Because he was reincarnated while linked to such an item, he reasoned that he might have gained the aptitude for ancient magic. Yuki found the possibility intriguing. Right after his reincarnation, Yuki had believed that the humans of this era would have thoroughly studied ancient items and shaped their entire culture around them. However, that assumption proved wrong. Ancient items had vanished because of wars, and now ancient magic was controlled by the Magician Guild. Even so, he considered that if he were to master ancient magic himself, perhaps he could help build a culture around it and make this world a more comfortable place to live. Soon after, he dismissed that line of thinking. He told himself to stop indulging in such delusions. In his previous life, he had been called the Frontier Demon King, but now he was nothing more than the illegitimate child of a baron. He no longer held lofty ambitions. What he truly desired was to understand humans and learn to imitate them. As Yuki lay on his bed, loud voices echoed from outside. Rumiya excitedly announced that it seemed Brother Yuki had caught rabbits and that tonight's dinner would be his meat. Martha added with admiration that Lord Yuki was remarkable and that the meal would surely taste good. Hearing this, Yuki felt content. He had been reincarnated into a family, and even being treated as the illegitimate child of a baron was enough for him. He was no longer feared or accused of being a demon lord. Now he was simply an average master magician. All he wanted was to enjoy peaceful village life and eat meat every week. That alone would satisfy him. In his heart, he quietly wished that his previous life would no longer linger over him.